Do you ever feel like you're trying to lead your church, but you've got one hand tied behind your back? Welcome to episode 85 of Minipod with me, Dave Jacobs. You know, I've been coaching pastors of smaller churches full time for almost 17 years now. And so because of that, I try to stay informed, by, looking at what's the latest stuff out there, podcasts, blogs, conferences, books, all those things that tend to help pastors, lead their churches. And a lot of that is, there's just a lot of good stuff out there. But I have found that a lot of the advice that comes from pastors of medium-sized churches and even large churches, not to mention mega churches, it just doesn't fit. It's not going to work. Now, some of the advice from pastors of these size churches, it will work in a really small church setting. But to be honest with you, I'm always frustrated when I'm like reading some article on Facebook or something like that, some podcast or like I'd said, some blog, because like in the back of my mind I have this inner dialogue that is saying that some of the pastors who are going to be reading the same article that I've just read, they're just not going to be able to implement that great idea because back home in their church, there are just so many problems and obstacles that they're facing that it's like they're trying to lead with one hand tied behind their back. And the real scary thing is when a pastor feels like I'm trying to lead with two hands tied behind my back. Now, here are some examples of what I mean by having one hand tied behind your back. That could be a board that is difficult to work with, or maybe an influential leader who opposes them. What about the threat of losing their job, or a church that refuses to change? How about a church that is sinking financially, or in that church there are one or two individuals or families that are the ones running things, and they've made that very clear? How about a congregation with a long history of chewing up and spitting out pastors? I bet you could add a lot of things to this list. If you feel like you're trying to lead with one hand tied behind your back, let me offer you these few suggestions. Number one, boy, I tell you, you got to pray. You've got to pray for strength. You've got to pray for patience. Problems like those I've just listed, they're not going to go away overnight. You got to pray for wisdom. You've got to pray for the problem to be removed. And if the problem is a person, don't be afraid of praying that that person's heart be changed or that they be removed from the church. Number two, develop a plan that'll move you in the direction you need to go, no matter how small that movement might be. Don't give up. And it just, like accepting the fact that you have one hand tied behind your back, thinking, well, what can be done? See, any movement in the right direction, no matter how small, will eventually get you where you want to go. But what about if you feel like you have two hands tied behind your back? Some of you might feel this way, and you might be right. If this is the case, you might need to move on from your present church. There are some dysfunctional and toxic churches out there that'll probably never be anything other than dysfunctional and toxic. If God has called you to be a martyr, well, then by all means be a martyr. But if not, move on. You just have got to live to fight another day. The kingdom of God needs you. However, don't make a decision as important as leaving without talking to a wise, experienced, trusted colleague before you do anything. And if this is the situation that you find yourself in, contact me. I'm here. I can help. And I can really help if you're trying to lead a church with one hand tied behind your back. This is Dave Jacobs, and I'll talk to you next week.